Okay, so welcome to sort of the introduction of my book. This is the name that I've selected, College Degree Crapshoot. And for those that understand a crapshoot, it's usually something you would do in a gamble. And I think that basically there are a lot of forces, economic forces, that really have increased the risks of getting a bachelor's degree for mostly lower and middle income Americans who cannot get into the very, very best schools. And then, of course, how to manage those risks I talk about. So first of all, let's start with a general overview of your choices for college. You actually have three choices. You can go to a public college or university. So the word public college simply means that these are overwhelmingly state-sponsored or county government-sponsored colleges. So, for example, Dutchess Community College is sponsored by the County of Dutchess as well as the state of New York. All of the SUNY system, State University of New York, that's the public college and university system in New York. There are a lot of very popular public colleges and universities around the country. Locally, UConn is popular, UMass has been popular, UNH is New Hampshire University of Vermont. But if you look across the country, there are, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Wisconsin in Madison, the University of California at Berkeley, University of Texas. These are all public colleges and universities, not-for-profit colleges. They are state-sponsored overwhelmingly, although you can have a county-sponsored government as well, college as well. The other types of colleges we're very familiar with are the private schools, not-for-profit colleges. So they date back, the oldest not-for-profit college that we have that's private is Harvard. Harvard College was founded nearly 400 years ago, if you can believe that, 1636, if my dates in my head are correct. And so it's almost 400 years old, and it was actually founded, it's usually founded early on. It was for religious purposes, because what you studied at Harvard in the 1600s was theology. You went there to become a minister of the cloth. And so oftentimes a lot of these colleges, the older schools like Yale and Columbia, Princeton, if they're that old in the colonial age, when we were still colonies, overwhelmingly they were started by religious groups. And one of the main focuses at that time was to produce educated ministers, so they could attend to the flock. Right? So, but as we know, colleges have changed quite a bit, and there are a lot of ones that are religious that have turned non-religious, like Marist, for example. Marist was started as Marist Brothers is Catholic, but of course it's not a religious school at this point anymore. But there are some that are still, like Mount St. Mary was founded as a religious school and still has its foundations as a religious group. But these are independent groups that they've organized for an educational mission. There are some that are very, very popular and very well known, like I mentioned, Harvard and Columbia. Georgetown are some of the bigger ones. Vassar is small, but it's an older non-for-profit college, and it's got a very, very good reputation as a competitive liberal arts college. And so does Smith College in Massachusetts. They have been known for its competitiveness as an older liberal arts college. So we're surrounded by them in our area as well, such as, like I said, Marist and Mount St. Mary. For the public schools in our area, Dutchess and SUNY New Paltz are the ones that are closest to us. And then there are the for-profit colleges. So these are colleges and universities, but they are organized as corporations, and they want to make a profit from those activities. And so It's reasonable to have these schools available because there's such a large demand for college education. But they have a little bit of a slant, right? They want to make money from these activities. So they want to help you and get a degree, but they also want to make a profit from helping you. That doesn't mean that not-for-profits don't make profits. They just can't call them that. But it is what it is. So you might have heard of DeVry University or Compella, Full Sail University, getting a lot of press. Of course, the University of Phoenix is quite big. These are all for-profit colleges and universities. And so when you are looking for a college and university to attend, these are basically your choices, okay? So for the very few, and I do mean few, they have achieved excellent grades in high school. They ace the SAT. And they belong to every type of club in high school, and they might be athletic as well. They have quite a resume as a very young person, in their teens. And so this really opens up, you do have excellent grades in school, which is actually the best indicator. I know that there's a lot of emphasis on the SAT to get into college, but actually the best indicator of doing well in college is not the SAT, it's actually your high school grades. So even if you had A's and B's in high school and you didn't do so well on the SAT, it's really your high school grades that would be the best predictor of how you do in college. We just emphasize the SAT way too much. But this provides people with, these folks with incredible opportunities to attend what we consider the most competitive colleges. So colleges are sort of ranked on how competitive they are, and that means how difficult it is to get in, right, to be admitted. So there are some schools, mostly the private not-for-profits that I mentioned earlier, like the Harvards and the Columbias and the Vassars and the NYUs, that are very difficult to get in. A lot of people apply, but there are most people get rejected, or a lot of people get rejected and don't get in. And so if you're one of these students, one of the few, you can go to either, you know, a very, very prestigious Ivy League school or another highly selective college. You should definitely go. It doesn't matter, the price tag doesn't matter, because the benefits are so beyond the price tag. Let me give you an example. Let me give you 3 reasons, if you got into Harvard or Columbia, why you should go. And this is as a freshman, which none of you guys are part of this group, but for those lucky few, that's what I said. So even if they're poor, lower or middle class, they should still go, because number one, you have to understand that a lot of these schools were started when we were colonies. And who could afford to send their kids to colonies? We were still working on a farm. Most people were working on the farm. We had an agrarian society. And so only the rich could do it. And so these are schools that have been established by the wealthy, and still are basically schools for the wealthy, even though a lot of other people can get in. And that matters because it's the wealthy that really control a lot of what's going on. They are in charge of government institutions, they're in charge of corporations, they're in charge of a lot of different things. They have incredible influence. We all still have, I mean, an aristocracy. Every society has an aristocracy. I know we don't talk about it that way here, but in history, you learned about an aristocracy, right? The very wealthy who control and manage much of society's institutions. Well, that's still true. Just because it's because everyone fell asleep in history class doesn't make it irrelevant. It's quite relevant even today. And so these are the aristocracy. So if you go to those schools, you're going to be going to school with the aristocracy. Chances are you're going to be getting friends with the aristocracy, with the upper class, with the folks that are controlling it. You're going to be introduced to people who can give you incredible opportunities and great jobs after school. And if you're lucky, you might even marry someone who's upper class. It's a good way to increase your income quite rapidly. Marry someone who's already got the money. it's been part of my plans. I failed for 50 some years, but nonetheless, you know, it's one of those things. There's a lot of benefits to going to those schools. Period. Education is great. Opportunities are great. Folks you are going to be friends with, the companies that go recruit there, all terrific, all terrific. But sadly, a lot of us are not in that category. So for most of us, for the rest of us, we only have, and when I mean the rest of us, I mean, you know, we might have earned, you know, average, good, or even some very good grades in high school. You know, we might have achieved average or below average SAT scores. We might not necessarily know what we want to study. You know, but despite all of that, you know, we have potential. We have potential. So for most of us, the choice is either attend your public schools, your public colleges and university systems, or attend one of the other schools that are not in that class. What I consider, let's put it as a non-elite private school. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. That's really the choice for most of us. And I think the choice is obfuscated by marketing. A lot of these other private schools, particularly in the northeastern part of the country, we tend to think private schools are in some way, shape, or form better than public schools. We know that, you know, for a fact. That's not true around the rest of the world, around the rest of the country. You go down the south, you go down in the west, it's really your public universities that are better. There's some exceptions, obviously. But here in the Northeast, where we're older, we're original colonies, a lot of schools, colleges were started as private. They've already gained reputations as being great. They sort of have an advantage. You know, so if you look at SUNY in general, and you look at some of the private schools we have in New York, a lot of people say, oh, a lot of private schools are better. That's probably not true. Probably not true. But it's been part of our heritage and our culture to think private education is better than public education. And so a lot of students are interested in going to private schools. They'd rather go to Marist as a private school than go to New Paltz. Are they right? Well, let's take a look. There are risks for everybody who goes to school. Everybody who decides that private school is in one way, shape, or form better than the public school. So what makes Marist better than New Paltz? Well, that's because it's private, right? In people's minds, it's better. That's a part of our, like I said, it's part of our culture. But the risks are the same no matter where you're going. Let's take a look at the risks. The first risk, I think, is something that you need to understand, that labor is global. Labor is global, meaning that it doesn't really matter, you know, where people are located, the jobs will go, right? And what's really increased, a lot of people say, oh, this only affects the factories. Yeah, factories they've been closed in America and they open up in China, so we've lost a bunch of those jobs. I hate to tell you, there is increasing amounts of white collar work, the type of work you need college for. Engineering jobs are going all over the world. Accounting, management, finance types of jobs, they're going all over the world. And a lot of you are studying in areas that are actually subject to globalized competition. So you're not just competing with everyone locally, you're competing with everyone globally who can do those things. Now, we still have a lot of jobs and we're very competitive in the United States. That's true. But it doesn't mean that getting that job, getting that degree in a certain area means you're not subject to any competition, because in some way, shape, or form, you've achieved something. You haven't. You still have to compete with everybody around the world who has that same set of education and skills, because labor markets have been globalized. And that's not going to change. That's not going to change. Another risk is how much money students are, you know, people are willing to to get into just to get a bachelor's degree. We already went over this in the last class. Student debt around 30 grand. Um, it's quite a heavy load. That's for bachelor's degrees, but I think part of the problem is a lot of people borrow so much money for their bachelor's degrees that they forget it's not like you're baking a cake. When you bake a cake, you put the ingredients, you mix them all up, you put them in the oven. That's what college is like. And 4 years later, it's done. You got your bachelor's degree and the cake is done. And that's it. You can start eating. Well, no, that's not how it works today. It's about lifelong learning. Knowledge is doubling every 2 to 3 years. The knowledge base in the world is doubling every 2 to 3 years. The rapid pace of information is incredible. And new jobs are being created every year. As technology and other things change, new jobs are created. And so it's hard to say that your bachelor's degree is going to prepare you for something that may or may not be there 4 years from now. Why borrow all that money? That's a risk. That's sort of betting on it. Because after your degree, guess what? You're probably going to need more training. You're probably going to need, to learn new things. And so it doesn't make any sense to pile up the amount of debt that people have today just to get a bachelor's degree. Like the bachelor's degree is the be all end all of your knowledge. It's not. It's just the beginning of your knowledge journey. There's much more to your journey of knowledge than the bachelor's degree. So why pile on so much debt to get it? To me, it's a risk. It's a very big risk. Some people might need to go to graduate school. Some people might need to get more skill. You might need to get certified in a particular technical skill. You might need other types of education as you get older. It's not the end all be all. And that debt thing, it's so easy to get a loan because all you need to do is be a student. Sign here, please. That's easy money. And that's, as we talked about in the last class, it's a real big problem. One of the other things that's interesting is everyone thinks it's great because of higher wages. There's always been that understanding that a bachelor's degree is worth about $1 million more than a high school diploma. Well, I think the premium has come down a little bit. It's worth about, on average, $800,000 more. But it's only worth 31% more than an associate's degree. So folks with an associate's degree are doing quite well. If they got a bachelor's degree, they're going to be increasing their salaries roughly about 30% over time. Over time. It's not an immediate thing. It's an over time thing. Right? Wages for bachelor's degree holders since 2000 has been basically flat. If you adjust for inflation, a little bit below where it was even in 1970, 1980, 1990 compared to today. So it's not like it's this great pot of gold at the end of the bachelor's degree rainbow that you're going to grab. You're going to start off based on your education and experience. And of course, you're still subject to globalization of labor. You're still subject to a lot of competition. You're also subject to the fact that whatever wages you do make, you're going to pay back your loan. So it's not as good of a deal as a lot of people think. It doesn't mean you shouldn't get it. It's just a smart way to do it. I'm just talking about the risks. Another risk here is how, there's still unemployment at every single level of education. Even if you have a PhD, there's still an unemployment rate for PhD holders. No matter what your level of education, there's still an unemployment rate. Okay. And so it's not like getting a degree means I'm always going to have a job. That's not true. It's not true. There's always going to be some unemployment regardless of the level of degree, level of education you have. The real problem is the expectation that you're going to make a lot of money, that bachelor's degree is going to land you a great job. It does for some people. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But for a lot of people, and I'm talking a lot of people, 4 out of 10, they're working in jobs after school, after they get their degree, They're working in jobs that they didn't need the degree for. That's how they're starting. And so there's that large expectation that that bachelor's degree is going to put me in the money, when in fact it's just going to start you on another road for your career. And like I said, about 40% of people that get a bachelor's degree start off in jobs in which they didn't need the degree for. That's called underemployment. Underemployment. And that's a huge risk, because I think the expectation is one thing, the reality says something else. That's why it's a risk. A lot of people are also worried about, and we talk a lot about in this country, the high school dropout rate. Well, the high school dropout rate is relatively low, well below 10% these days. That's not true for the college dropout rate. College dropout rate is much, much higher than that. 2, 3, 4 times as high. So roughly about 1 out of every 3 students that start college will not finish. And so that's a high dropout rate. So they start, but they don't finish. They still got to pay back their debt. Student loan debt is theirs, even though they didn't finish. That puts them in a hole. That puts them in a hole. They're still subject to all the other issues that are going on here. But again, there's always that risk that for whatever reason, people drop out. So why go to a very, very expensive school if there's that risk that you might not know what you want, and you might be in over your head and you might drop out. A few others. One of the biggest risks, I think, too, are folks that have overlooked occupational opportunities in vocational and technical training. My dad was an electrician. He said if he would do it all over again, he'd be a plumber, because they make a little bit more money. But either way, we have a whole generation of licensed tradespeople that are retiring or have retired. And what's left in their wake is a whole bunch of jobs that no one can do. Those vocational technical jobs are jobs, and they're very, very good paying jobs. There's nothing wrong with being a licensed trade person. Our society, since I think the 80s, started sort of admiring or putting out this idea that white collar is better than blue collar. Why would you want to be a blue collar worker when you can be a white collar worker? It's a better life, you make more money, blah, 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 blah. And I think we started as a society looking down at people who were truck drivers or bus drivers or welders or electricians and so forth. And it's sad, because we need everybody. We need all those folks. There's nothing wrong with those. A lot of licensed trade people, even truck drivers, you need a license to drive a big truck, they make good money. They make really, really good money. You don't need a college degree to do those things. I mean, it's better if you're like an auto tech, which is another technical job. There are associate degrees in automotive technology that are really, really helpful for those folks. They make really good money when everything is said and done. We shouldn't be looking down at one another. Just because someone is wears a suit, another person wears jeans and a baggy sweatshirt doesn't make. We shouldn't be judging people this way. Work is work. We all need to work. And I think this is exacerbated too by our society, and we see this like for guidance counselors. Guidance counselors want to push everybody into college, because in some way, shape, or form, it makes the town look better and it keeps their real estate prices high. I go to a high school that 95% of the students that graduate go to college. Well, is that really necessary? I mean, it sounds good. It sounds great, right? It's a great marketing thing. Oh, our school system is great. We send all of our kids to college. Yeah. It's not necessary. It's not, everyone shouldn't necessarily be going to college and getting degrees. We need people to do all types of work, not just college educated work. And so I think part of it is our society has glorified the white collar types of work which require education at the expense of all of our blue collar and other manual labor type of work. And that's sad. It's just a sad reality that we live in. It's a risk. It adds to the risks because people that would be perfectly good at a vocational, technical, licensed trade type of career are going to college and they're not making it. Well, maybe, again, there's nothing wrong with the voc-techs. That's a risk that's overlooked. We've already been seeing in this class, because it is a personal finance class, how tight family budgets are and how much you need to make as a family just to cover the basic expenses of living. And now you want to add to that a college loan payment, a student debt payment. That's just going to make a tight budget tighter. Even worse, for parents, in many cases, they don't contribute to their retirement funds. Instead, they use that extra money to pay for college tuition at, in many cases, higher price schools. It's killing them. As you'll see, we'll get to the retirement module soon, and you'll see how people are just not saving enough to retire, and thus they have to keep working in their 70s. Well, they're taking a risk by not putting that aside and using that money to send their kids to schools that may not work out for them. Part of it is a sacrifice. Part of it is some people believe that's the parent's duty. But there's real risks in that. There's real risks in that. And again, family budgets are already very, very tight, and they're going to add both the pressure of another loan. We are in a situation, not just in the US, but globally, we're certainly in a recession at this stage of the game here in 2020. But the economic outlook is relatively weak. It's not like we're going to be booming and adding tons of jobs anytime soon. And more companies keep announcing layoffs or restructurings that result in layoffs. So the job market isn't necessarily looking terrific for a lot of folks. And again, a lot of people go to school to get educated because they're looking for certain type of placement in certain jobs or other opportunities. So the weak economic outlook globally and locally in our country doesn't add to the benefits. It actually is a risk. I am adding another risk to my book, an updated book, so it'll be another risk, number 9, called time to completion. And that means that because most college students are quite busy, we did a recent survey in the business department where 45% of our students are working full-time, even though they're full-time students. Well, something's got to give. And what often gives is time. And we've seen this over and over again. The time to complete an associate's degree in the United States, an associate's degree is a 2-year degree, structured full-time to be done in 2 years, has been taking almost 4 years for most people. A 4-year degree, which is what you would pursue for a bachelor's degree at a college or university. It's a 4-year degree. It's structured to be completed in 4 years full-time. The average time to completion, 6 years. So what does that mean? I mean, people are paying for college longer than they expected. They're paying, instead of paying 2 years for a 2-year degree, they're paying longer than 2 years. That adds up. And college tuition is not going down, it's going up. And so they're just paying more and more money for the degree because it's taking longer and longer amounts of time to complete it. So that's another added risk. So those are some of the risks. And there's ways to deal with that. There's a few assumptions that I have to explain when I wrote this book in terms of assumptions that what most people expect from going to college and getting your bachelor's degree. One of the first expectations is that the degree will lead to a good paying job. That's one of the biggest assumptions I had in writing this book, that most people are going to college because they think there's a good job at the end of the rainbow. Okay, that's one expectation, one assumption. Another expectation or assumption is that most college students or prospective students think that the colleges they visit, the colleges they are giving them all the information um, about the college. And they're not really paying attention to the outcome of its graduates. And what I mean by outcome is those that actually graduate from the school. What are they doing? Are they working? Are they in graduate school, pursuing other education? Are they unemployed? And are they making any money? What are they making after they've done and completed this degree program? How are they doing? That's an outcome. You very rarely hear any of this stuff from colleges when you go visit them. But I think it's really important that that you do pay attention to these types of things. I don't think that college, a lot of colleges have the information. They don't always make it readily available. And it's not something prospective students really talk a lot about, but I think it really should be one of them. Another expectation is that if a college says it's accredited, it's accredited. And that, okay, that means it's accredited, it's fine, I can go there. Well, sadly, there's different types of accreditations and it matters. The highest level of accreditation that we're looking for is something called regional accreditation. And in our area, that's middle states. And that's the most important accreditation a college can have. Some private schools do not have that accreditation, but they say they're accredited because they are. They have a national accreditation. They're accredited by somebody, but it's not the same. And so folks that might have gone to Ridley Lowell, which is no longer in Poughkeepsie, but it was a two-year school in Poughkeepsie, and they wanted to transfer to even Dutchess or another school, we wouldn't recognize any of their credits for any of the courses because it's not accredited by middle states. So accreditation actually matters quite a bit. I'll go one step further here. For business programs, what you want to look for is AACSB accreditation. That's the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. Now, thankfully, all of our area schools, Marist, New Paltz, are AACSB accredited. But this is important for business students particularly because if you want to go to graduate school, some people want to get an MBA later on, they have to get their bachelor's degree from an AACSB accredited school. So not all schools are created equally, and accreditation matters. But I think a lot of people just assume if it's accredited, it's accredited. Okay, I'm going. There's also an assumption and expectation that people have that colleges are not business-like organizations, that they're mission-based. All they care about is your education. Well, yes, colleges are mission-based, no doubt about it. But they are also organizations that have budgets and goals, and financial issues matter. And so this is something that you also have to understand, that in some cases, colleges need students to survive. You know what happens when colleges don't have students? They close, they go out of business. And that's happened to several schools already. It's important to understand that these are business-like organizations. And of course, if they're for-profit, they are corporations. They do want to make a profit. They're not hiding anything from you. And so that's sort of an important thing to understand. Even if it's a Catholic school, I went to Catholic schools. Yes, it's mission-based, but guess what? They have to balance their budget and they want to grow. So that's another assumption. I think a lot of people have the expectation, and part of the assumptions that I made here is that you do not hire a consultant to help you analyze the data, do a financial analysis, see what's actually in your best interest. And not that everyone needs one, but for those that are looking at very expensive schools, it might be worthwhile, unless you're really, really good at the stuff yourself, which a lot of people are, to get an objective opinion This is how much it's really going to cost you. This is the risk to your financial status. Is it really worth it? So there are some assumptions there that I think are important that I make. So knowing all the risks, what's the best way to manage the system of higher education? Well, again, if you can't get into the very, very best elite colleges, your choice is either go to the public school system, the public college system, in this case, SUNY for us, or CUNY if you're down in New York City, or go to a private school, right? And there's a couple. But the actual way to keep things under control in terms of cost is get your bachelor's degree with a 2+2 program. A 2+2 program is 2 years at a community college, and then you transfer to a state school for the other 2 years to complete your bachelor's degree. That's the lowest overall cost in getting your bachelor's degree. That's the smartest thing for most people. And again, I use the word most, not all. Again, the cost is lowest, of course, if you finish on time, which means a 4-year degree is actually finished in 4 years if you're full-time, and so I really do think that that's one of those things to consider when you're looking at this. But there are ways to manage the system. If you're going to get into debt, I would wait until you get to graduate school, because so it's an MBA program or a master's or PhD or other program, professional school. Because those are the folks that have made out really well in terms of earnings over time. I know Bernie rails against the 1%, but in terms of the highest earners, usually it's those that have graduate degrees that are earning the highest amount of money. And so, so whether you're going to business school, law school, medical school, dental school, other types of professional schools, or you're going right to graduate schools for arts and sciences, those are the folks that have been making most of the money since globalization has started. And so you might as well wait if you're going to get into debt for something. Why don't you wait for that? So I think that's my point. There are definitely ways in which to manage things. I'll stop this, go to our big screen, and see if there's any questions. How did you like that?
I thought it was good. It's interesting. My question for you is, what did you do for school?
I did it all wrong, which is another reason why I'm writing the book. I went to private schools, and looking back, I see that it was a mistake in some ways. Of course, I went in the 80s where things were a lot cheaper than they are today. And back in the 80s, there was what we call a higher wage premium in getting your degree. And so there was, I think, slightly less risk. Of course, there wasn't much of a globalized workforce and things like that at that time. So the risks have changed over time than when I went. I still have a student loan that I'm paying from one of the private schools I attended. So I don't think that's part of my mistake. But again, I trusted what was going on in higher education. Whatever they told me, I said, okay, well, they're giving me an honest opinion and feedback. And I think that was a mistake, because you have to, not that you're a consumer, but you are partially a consumer when you're looking for education. And you have to think what's best for you in overall costs and benefits. I think a lot of people just look at, they hear the benefits they want to hear and forget about all the risk. And you can't have benefits without having costs. There's no such thing as 100% benefit, no cost. And so you have to do that cost benefit analysis, which means that, okay, these are the benefits, what are the costs? And in this case, what I'm saying is the the costs or the risks are higher today than they were, say, 40 years ago. So yes, so um, my bachelor's degree is from a private school. My MBA is from a private school. My MED is from a private school. But my doctoral program was a public school. I just didn't finish. So you can't call me Dr. Mike. But this was one of the things that I was studying back then. I've always been interested um, in outcomes and the business end, the economic end of going to school. Clark.
I had a client in New York City who wrote an educational book about education. It's actually the only one there is about private schools in New York City for children. And she also worked as a consultant. So I usually did her hair at home over 21 years. So I've heard how this works,
Right.
for people. And one weird thing is, it's a wealth gap issue because, she's very wealthy. She charged tens of thousands of dollars. So the people she was talking to were very wealthy. And it's just amazing. I think her school of choice was like Harvard. So, and she's loud, rich, obnoxious. She's like, well, my family gives 10 million to Harvard a year, and now that my kids are graduated, I give a few thousand in their names. And she's talking to some kid that's going to kindergarten, and she's like, if you want to go to Harvard, what you need to do is start, giving them millions of dollars. I mean, it's a whole other world out there that is just wow.
It's an interesting business for sure.
Yeah. And the differences between what's available to people is just shocking. And the outcomes. And you mentioned marriage. Now, for some,
Well, that was a side. That was like a third benefit.
it's a big deal, especially within certain religions that you have to marry within certain religions, and they have to be within a certain, wealth range. So, you have to go choosing a school to meet people with the same religion in the same wealth group. I mean, it's,
Yeah, it's important. But again, I mean, the sociology of marriage is very important to understand too, because marriage. I mean, we think of where we get married to someone we love. That was not the case. The history of marriage was not about love. It was about appropriate partnerships. You stayed within your class, and these were overwhelmingly arranged types of things. Wealthy wanted to marry wealthy, not because they were madly in love with each other, or because it made sense. It made sense politically, it made sense economically, it made sense socially to do so. The idea that you marry for love is relatively new. And so that's just another topic that we can talk about maybe another day. But other comments on what you heard, book related?
I wanted to mention I have a bunch of friends who went to Columbia Business School. And the connections they made by going there is just beyond belief. I went to visit a friend and she got married there. They're living in Switzerland. And, we take the train over to Italy. And it's like there's a whole worldwide network of people we saw along the way that were classmates.
And that's graduate school, see, because, it, I mean, of course, if they were lucky enough, if someone who's really that great and can get into a Columbia or Harvard from the get-go, the benefits are amazing. You and I, all of us are not in that group. But it doesn't mean that we can't do that for graduate school someday. It's quite possible that you can get your bachelor's degree in business or whatever from even a SUNY New Paltz and get into a really good graduate school program. So what I was saying there is it doesn't make a lot of sense to use so much debt on the bachelor's degree because you're not done. It's not like you're baking a cake. It's going to be done in a time frame. You're never done. The world has changed. It's lifelong learning. My MBA was from 1993. We didn't have, the internet was just public then. We didn't have email. We didn't have any of that stuff. Never mind online. I had to learn all this stuff. This is all stuff you continue to learn. It's not like you're done. It's not like you go to school, you come out, you're done. You know everything you need to know for the rest of your life. You don't. What you need to know is there's always more to know. There's always more to learn.
It'll
And
be interesting to
you have to be prepared for that. That's, I think, the real basis for undergraduate education is, are you prepared to continue to learn? Because things are changing rapidly. The world is rapidly changing.
Yeah, so with the changing, like after COVID, so uh, the schools in the future, say you finish it here at DDC, and then in 2022, you want to get your bachelor's, it might be open to you that you could go to any school in the world, but still live in Dutchess.
Yeah.
Because of the
Well, I mean, that's true. I mean, that can happen. That can
yeah, it probably will. Because it'll be more money for them. Hey, we'll give you Zoom classes. We don't care where you are.
happen. Thank you, Clark. Anybody else? Comments or questions? Or
Well, I think kind of what you were talking about last week with the whole like being in debt and stuff, like comparing like what the average debt is after you leave school. I mean, I think that's important. I mean, like I said, leaving Dutchess, it's affordable. Even if you don't have financial aid and things like that, you're gonna leave here and it's affordable. And you're not gonna be in the hole. And maybe if you are, it's a minor debt. And then you can
minor debt, right.
yeah, and then you're going somewhere else where, like those links you posted are great. You know what I mean? It's like just seeing what the average debt is and what people, how many people can pay back the loans, shows you, the benefit of what that school has to offer, kind of like what you're saying with
And
the
those are some of the
connection to
metrics.
Harvard and Columbia. I'm sure when you graduate from Harvard, you essentially can go anywhere you want. You know what I mean? They're going to connect
And
you.
you're not going to have a lot of debt either.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at some of the Ivy League schools, the older schools, they have much less debt for their graduates than the average person does. So they do take care of you. If you need the help, they take care of you. Okay, well, I'm very happy you gave me the chance to present this to you today. I hope you picked up a few things, if not a bunch of questions. One of the things, I do list a bunch of questions for families to think about. I mean, and you can think about this too. I mean, if you know someone who, I mean, think about this. If you are 17, 18, and you're applying to school, and you have a buddy who's also 17, 18, is applying to another school, you go to SUNY New Paltz, for example, and study business. And that person is going to another four-year school, say Marist. There's different prices to go to school, right? A lot of people would say, well, because Marist is private, it's better than New Paltz. Well, what's the outcome? What's the outcome, right? In 4 years, they get their degree. Who's recruiting them? Who hired them? What are they getting paid to do? One of the most important metrics you need to know is a very objective metric. What are employers, which are private employers, what are they willing to pay the graduates of their program? They don't have any stake in the program, but what are those employers willing to do, willing to pay for the graduates of those programs? My stepdaughter went to UMass, the Eisenberg School of Management. I was teaching Massachusetts for many years. I taught at a public college, but I also taught part-time private college. And this particular private college was a business school. That's how they came out. But their graduates had an average salary of $40,000 from the metrics I saw for a bachelor's degree. Whereas at UMass, which is a public school, part of the UMass system, their bachelor's degree recipients averaged 55 grand. Same degree, same four-year degree, but employers thought so much more highly of the public school that they were willing to plop down 55 grand per year for its average graduate versus this private school, which has been boasting as a business school for many, many years. But yet their graduates, at least the data that I saw, their graduates were pulling out about 40 grand after 4 years there. I think that's a very good measure of what society, private society, thinks of the education at a school, what they're willing to pay for their graduates. So what other graduates of Marist making after they get out of their business program? I mean, I don't know offhand. What are the graduates at SUNY New Paltz making after their 4 years there with their same degree as their friend that went to Marist? I would compare that. I mean, is it really worth putting out another 20 grand a year to go to a private school if you're making roughly the same amount of money coming out? You're going to pay it back if it's debt, right? I would want to also make sure the college I go to is preparing me for graduate school, just in case I need more schooling. So not only am I getting a bachelor's degree in a field of business, for example, but it's also preparing me to go on to graduate school to get an MBA if needed or whatnot. To me, that's important, you know. So, I mean, I really think, you know, there are lots of different questions here. I mean, you know, if the outcomes are equivalent, why pay all that extra money for private education? If they're not, of course, if private education is willing to give you lots of scholarships and bring that cost down, so it's equal, well, then that's another story. But in terms of just looking at the price tag with no financial aid factored in, it's risky. It's risky. It might not be worth it. So it's just really, the book is set up to be a model for discussion before you finalize your decision. Maybe you should talk about these risks a little bit. I know you already know about the benefits. Let's talk about some of the risks and costs. And cost is more than a number on a piece of paper. Cost is a lot more than a number on a piece of paper. And so you have to look at it in a broader context. So it's more of a discussion-based type of book. Outlines some things, gives you some facts and figures and more questions to ask. Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much for allowing me the chance to present the book I've been working on for quite some time. Eventually, I will finish this thing. But, you know, life is busy and it's hard to sit down and say, okay, today I'm going to write a book. So it's something that happens over many years. I've been rewriting it for, this is probably my 8th rewrite. So it is what it is. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope it was in one way, shape, or form helpful to you and gave you something to think about.